For tens of thousands of years, a monstrous dragon ravaged humanity, killing indiscriminately. Over the course of humanity's time on this planet, the dragon has been responsible for millions of deaths and incredible suffering. However, the dragon wasn't all-powerful and could be held at bay by the use of a special resource. But it took the combined effort of every able-bodied human to collect this resource. If a community or individual didn't gather enough, it would be a mere weeks or sometimes days before the dragon returned, bringing pain and suffering with it. Things seem bleak for humanity. In their best attempt to hold off the dragon, humans split themselves into two professions, working hand in hand to gather enough of the resource. There was very little time or excess energy to devote to anything other than fighting off the dragon. However, everything changed around 10,000 BC, when the first Druids of the land appeared, and using their advanced sorcery, they were able to transform the land around them, causing the precious dragon-defying resource to sprout from the dirt. Just a handful of Druids could protect a whole community from the wrath of the dragon. Hello, and welcome to Off Science and Sorcery, the podcast where each week we aim to uncover the magical advancements humans have made during our time on this planet. Today is a special episode because, well, it's our very first proper one. If you haven't gathered yet, today we'll be exploring the beginnings of farming and how we changed from hunters and gatherers to a society based around agriculture, allowing for the rise of calorie surpluses and keeping the dreaded starvation dragon at bay. This was one of the absolutely biggest developments in human history, and with some real scientific sorcery going on, so let's start to dig into it. Before the advent of agriculture, humans were split into two professions for finding food, hunters and gatherers. Hunters hunted, while gatherers, well, gathered. There were some huge problems with this structure, as basically it meant that the majority of each person's energy was solely devoted to finding food. Every able-bodied person in a community would have to pull their weight and hunt or gather as well, as the amount accumulated by each person was usually only enough to sustain themselves. It was also a system that worked against itself, as hunter-gatherers would exhaust all the available food in an area and would need to continuously move to new areas. This nomadic lifestyle meant precious calories were consistently being burned just moving around, requiring more food to be found. The nomadic lifestyle also meant that settlements were always extremely temporary, and therefore humans couldn't enjoy the benefits of long-term shelter, such as more insulated and warm homes during the winter. One benefit of the nomadic nature of hunter-gatherers is that they got to taste and experience a larger variety of foods as they found new food types as they travelled. However, this is heavily outweighed by the fact that many of these new foods that they would have tried would have been toxic and most likely caused many deaths. Most importantly, it stifled human innovation. Because each person had to focus the majority of their time on energy on where the next meal was going to come from, there was very little brain power left over to devote to developing new advancements or thinking about the big questions in life. Extraordinarily, this was the status quo for 200,000 years. It's kind of hard to believe that it took so long, and there wasn't even any technological hurdles stopping early humans from developing farming. But when you think about it, when all your energy is going into trying to acquire the next meal, there's very little leftover brain power to use to try come up with better ways of acquiring that next meal. It wasn't until sometime in between 10,500 BC and 9,500 BC that people finally started to have the idea, instead of constantly moving to find land that meets our needs, why don't we change the land we're currently on to meet our needs? And so began the beginning of the agricultural age for humans. Farming resulted in a significant change to every facet of human life. Suddenly one person could somewhat reliably produce more food than they themselves would need. A farmed field can produce anywhere from 10 to 100 times more calories than regular hunting and gathering would in that same land, and adding more people to the farm just increased this output, allowing humans to start to have excesses of food and give rise to the calorie surplus. There were 8 founding crops that were cultivated and farmed originally. These were emmer wheat, einkorn wheat, hulled barley, peas, lentils, bitter vetch, chickpeas and flax. These first farms that we have evidence of took place in what is now the land occupied Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel and Palestine. Over the following thousands of years, more crops were slowly domesticated. These are the crops that we are familiar with today, such as rice, rye and soybeans. Because a few people could produce a surplus of food, this meant that not everyone needed to be farmers. The nomadic ways of hunter-gatherers gave way to staying in long-term settlements, allowing for homes and more suitable forms of shelter. It also allowed non-farmers to pursue other careers and for economies to develop, as food from farmers was traded for other goods and services. This is the beginning of human civilization. So while this is all quite impressive, you're probably thinking, where does the magic come in? So let's start to look at things with the magical lens. First off, I don't think we often realize how incredible and magical plants actually are. Most of us don't actually grow our own food, and I think there's a somewhat magical moment which is experienced when you actually attempt to. I know I've had that recently, and it's from the fact that all plants need to live are fertilized soil, sunlight, water, and time. And given those 4 things, plants can grow into delicious food for us to eat. In a future episode, we'll look at all the wonderful and magical things plants can do. But even just beyond food, they are the machines of nature, taking nitrogen, water, and sunlight in and producing valuable resources for us. But let's look at what I think is truly magical about humanity's development of agriculture, and that's selective breeding. Often kids wish that they could turn fruits and vegetables into candy instead. And we often see in fantasy books and movies some sort of transfiguration of food. But that's literally happened in real life, albeit a somewhat slower process over larger periods of time. Selective breeding is simply taking the seeds of a crop that has attributes that we like and planting those seeds and not the others. And over time, as we continuously only plant these crops, we end up with vastly different products to what we started with. Let's look at some examples, but I warn you, I think this is absolutely wild, and it may change the way you see fruits and vegetables in the supermarket. The corn we have now is usually around 19 centimeters long. It peels easily, has a sweet taste, and is quite juicy. And on average, we'll have around 800 soft kernels. However, in 7000 BC, when corn was first domesticated, it was literally 10 times smaller at 1.9 centimeters. You would have to peel it by smashing it into pieces, and it would taste like a dry, raw potato, and would only have 5 to 10 very hard kernels. One of my favorite fruits is the peach. Our modern peaches are usually 10 centimeters long, have a 9:1 flesh to stone ratio with soft and edible skin, and are extremely sweet and juicy. Jumping back to 5500 BC, peaches were 4 times smaller and had a 3:2 flesh to stone ratio with a waxy skin and tasted earthy, sour, and slightly salty. I don't know about you, but the thought of a salty peach made me gag a little. Let's look at one final one, the watermelon. A standard modern watermelon is usually 50 centimeters long, nearly fat and starch-free, has a sweet smell and a delicious taste, and we've even been able to grow seedless varieties. We can also open them without too much effort. Watermelons were first domesticated in 3000 BC, and they were 5 centimeters long, which is an incredible 100 times smaller by volume. They would have had bitter and nutty seeds, would have been high in starch and fat, with a bitter taste and unpleasant smell, and would require a hammer or to smash them to open them up. All these examples follow the same simple process. We have all the scientific knowledge to understand how it works. It's quite similar to how humans evolved, except instead of letting nature decide which traits survive, we intervene and choose them ourselves. But yet, I can't stop myself from saying that this is all pretty damn magical. These days, humans have been able to hugely improve the process and dramatically reduce the time needed. In fact, there was one man, Luther Burbank, who lived between 1849 and 1926 and was responsible for breeding over 800 different types of fruits, vegetables, flowers, and trees, many of which we still eat today. Humans have learnt to take handfuls of seeds and turn them into bountiful harvests of fresh food to survive on, and on top of that, learned how to make that food suit our needs in terms of taste, smell, convenience, and yield. While our magic isn't instantaneous, it's definitely very real. There's many more subtopics we could cover here about what farmers have learned to do to truly reap the most reward from their labour. But let's just look at one for now, crop rotation, which I think is something really interesting as it represents a symbiotic relationship between humans and nature. Plants need various nutrients to grow, such as nitrogen. They absorb these nutrients from the soil they were planted in. However, as we continue to harvest plants from the same soil, those nutrients are depleted and no more plants will grow. By leaving a field empty, otherwise known as lie fallow, for a year, it could slowly recover lost nitrogen and other nutrients. That's not ideal though, as we can't go a year without food. However, we soon realize that by letting animals graze in a section of land, their waste would fertilize the soil and replenish the nutrients in the soil. We also discovered that legumes such as clover, peanuts, and chickpeas all actually add nitrogen back into the soil. And here's where the symbiotic relationship with nature is developed. By splitting our land into different fields and rotating what crops we plant in those fields, we can maximize the yield and prevent the situation of having nothing growing. By rotating between crops for human consumption, like wheat, crops for animal consumption, such as barley, and plus legumes for adding nutrients back into the soil, and letting a field lie fallow with animals grazing on it, we establish a system where we could maximize the output of a field for not only humans, but also to produce enough to raise animals and keep them fed. Whilst we raise the animals and feed them, they are also helping to feed us. Sometimes we think of science as going against nature, but I think this is another example of biology and chemistry being applied to benefit nature with magical results. So what are all of the lasting impacts from this change to agriculture? I think it would be easier to find things that haven't been impacted from agriculture. Because of it, we can lead the lives we live today. We don't have to spend our days trying to scavenge the land for our next meal and instead rely on there being suitable food around us if we have the means to purchase it. Essentially, all human innovation is reliant on agriculture. Farmers produce the fruit, vegetables, meat and dairy that we consume today and use to fuel us as we work on other pursuits. NASA wouldn't be on the forefront of space exploration if 8 hours of their day wasn't reliant on trying to find a suitable source of food. We've gone from a time where every scrap of food was precious to where we live in an abundance of it. We have all the choice in the world and are even in a situation where world hunger isn't even a problem of growing enough food, but more of a logistics problem of trying to get that food to those in need of it within various time constraints. Farmers will throw out tons of fruit and vegetables purely because it doesn't meet our expected beauty standards. I think to be able to reach this point from where we began is pure scientific sorcery at work and a true testament to human ingenuity. The shift to agriculture was the kickstart for human civilization and the societies we live in today, and we owe a lot to those druids of the land who work day in and day out to keep the dragon from coming for us all.